I'm Laurah Norton, and this is One Strange Thing, the show where we search the nation's news archives for stories that can't quite be explained. Strangers, if there's one thing we love more than a relatively modern cryptid story, and truly, all respect to the Dover demons and Flatwood monsters out there, it's a historical one. There's just something about digging into newspapers of a century or more past and reading about people who were grappling with the unknown in a time where real species were still being discovered with a startling regularity. It's an idea we discussed in our premium episode on that adorable little Australian freak, the platypus, and in our coverage of the Van Meter visitor. That sense of wonder, a time before instant media, before a camera was in everyone's hands, when people were like, oh, what new horror is this? That is right up our alley. So, it's in that spirit that we bring you a new flavor of weird. The wretch of Wisconsin, the knave of the Northwoods, the Hodag. This creature, though, is a little different than our average monster, in that it's both a piece of true American folklore and a true cryptid, one that appeared at a particular time and place, thus stirring up a lot of excitement in the scientific community. Imagine if a gnome turned up at a state fair, and you kind of get the idea. Described by the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel as, quote, a terrible brute with a dragon's body and fanged, snarling grin that smelled of buzzard meat and skunk perfume, the Hodag burst onto the Rhinelander scene in the early 1890s and caused quite a stir. In fact, it made such an impression that it's still a key figure in the area today. Sort of a town mascot, you might say. And, per the town's website, it's also a literal one for the local high school, who can proudly claim that they were at some point voted as having the best mascot in the entire country. We aren't sure by whom, but we certainly agree with this choice. It sure beats out our high school mascots, which were respectively a jaguar and a hurricane. Yep. Moving on. We need to give you a little bit of background on the area so you can fully understand who was involved in this whole Hodag craze. The small city of Rhinelander sits squarely in Oneida County, one of 5 that makes up the area known as the Northwoods. According to its official website, which means this is serious, the Northwoods is known for its, quote, vast forests and thousands of lakes. Nowadays, there's a thriving tourist industry built around all that natural abundance. Back in the late 19th century, though, logging and fishing were absolutely king. And it was in those Wisconsin logging camps that the story of the Hodag began. We found this description of how a Hodag is, well, born, kind of, from an 1893 issue of the Sunday Leader. It paints the creature as something that every logger in northern Wisconsin knew about. In fact, something long established as a fact of life in the area. Quote, it's generally well understood among all kinds of lumberjacks when an ox is butchered or accidentally killed in the woods that his immortal constitution turns into a Hodag, and the Hodag assumes the same color of the respective ox that he came out of. The Hodag assumes the strength of the ox, the ferocity of a bear, the cunning of the fox, and the sagacity of the merrow lumberman, and is truly the most to be feared of all the animals that the lumbermen come in contact with. We found another bizarre variation on the creation of the Hodag in the book The Hodag and Other Tales of the Logging Camps. It also involves oxen, but with a lot more effort and a lot more cursing. Quote, the customary burial ceremony of the ox was cremation, so a huge pile of brush was usually gathered and the remains of the ox placed carefully in the center. The belief of those sturdy woodsmen was that 7 years of continuous fire was necessary to exterminate the profanity which had accumulated in the body of the ox during his life. So, just to be clear, based on this claim, oxen had to be cremated for 7 years to burn away all of the cursing from their drivers that they'd endured throughout their lives. And then, just practically, imagine a 7 years long fire going in the forest, all willy-nilly. Even if horrific beasts weren't bursting forth from the ashes, you'd have to wonder why anyone would keep up such a practice at all. Well, they likely didn't. It seems like a silly idea. But it makes for a good story. And that is something that lumberjacks appreciated. And despite the Sunday leader's matter-of-fact tone, this was not a long-held Wisconsin belief. Based on everything that we've read, it was a fairly recent development in local lore, one that probably popped up around the same time that Paul Bunyan stories did. According to the Wisconsin Historical Society, the first written references to Paul popped up around the 1880s or so. They were popular in Canada and in the United States. And while the Hodag has possible earlier connections to the stories told by the Ojibwe people, that's per the official Rhinelander website, the 19th century version can pretty reliably be tracked to the tall tales told by those lumberjacks. And boy, did they tell those stories. Around their campfires, the Hodag grew to be practically invincible. According to the folklorist Paul C. Brown, it was said that, quote, "The Hodag never laid down. It slept leaning against the trunks of trees. It could only be captured by cutting deeply into the trunks of its favorite trees. It was said to eat mud turtles, water snakes, and muskrats, and it did not disdain human flesh." Strangers, we have no idea how cutting into a tree would damage the Hodag. Was the idea to trap it there when it went to sleep? The description was honestly lacking, and it seemed suspiciously tailored toward the taste of lumberjacks. But that was, allegedly, the lore. Either way, the monster established in American folklore was a terrifying creature. So it made sense that it would pop up in lumberjack stories, even alongside Paul Bunyan and, yes, his big blue ox. But that's not all that the Hodag was up to in Wisconsin, especially not in 1893, and then again in 1896. Today's episode is brought to you by Vinted. So, those clothes you're not wearing anymore, someone else would love them. Vinted is the app that gets them out of your closet and into someone else's, and puts a little extra money in your pocket too. And that sounds perfect for me because, honestly, my wardrobe has gotten completely out of hand. I absolutely love clothes. I always have. The problem is I have way more than my closet can hold. And right now it's packed so tight I can't fit one more thing. And that's a shame because I'm already planning my fall wardrobe, and there are pieces I've been dying to bring home. I know the fix is to clear out what I'm not wearing, and I also know that's the part I never get around to because it always feels like such a chore. So, Vinted is where I'm starting. I've been going through the app, and it looks super simple and fun to use. You photograph what you want to sell, you write a quick description, you set your price, and you post it. That's it. The item's listed, and it's ready for someone to buy. And when it sells, Vinted sends you a prepaid label, so you just pack it up and ship it. And with Vinted, there are no seller fees, so what you earn from a sale is yours to keep. The app's free to download too. That means the money from the clothes I'm clearing out goes straight toward those new pieces I've been eyeing. Ready to clean out your closet and make some extra money? Download the Vinted app for free and start listing. With no seller fees, you keep every dollar you earn. And for a limited time, enjoy free shipping in the US on Vinted. Now, we said that the Hodag was both folkloric and a cryptid, and we weren't kidding about that. We draw a distinction between the two in that the Hodag doesn't just exist in tall tales. It got news coverage and caught the interest of investigators from the Smithsonian when sightings were reported in 1893 and then in 1896. Over the span of that time, northern Wisconsin was pretty cryptid crazy. Per its state historical society, local lumber companies began to use the monster in their advertising. And the Hodag furor could be traced to the experience of a single person, Eugene Shepard, a man who was very familiar with the northern Wisconsin forests. According to the Wausau Daily Herald, Eugene was, quote, a timber cruiser, which meant he spent a lot of time in the deep woods calculating the value of timber found on tracts of land. The Herald went on to explain that means that he spent a lot of time living out in those logging camps, where there wasn't a lot of entertainment to be had. By the way, we imagine that podcast would have absolutely killed with loggers in the 19th century, so storytelling was a popular pastime. And apparently Eugene to his friends, had quite the story for his compatriots. Strangers, you have to understand that Gene was already known as something of a larger-than-life character in the town. According to the Rhinelander Daily News, Gene was famous for his Paul Bunyan stories, but he also got up to some antics of his own. One friend swore that he'd come upon Gene trying to lasso a giant turtle in a local lake. We are unclear as to whether he succeeded. He was also known for the practice of throwing his voice to frighten and irritate his neighbors, which sounds absolutely charming, and for pinching young women on trains. Then, according to the Herald, when someone invariably objected to this pinching, he would pretend that he was being taken to the local asylum and was thus not culpable for his actions. We are not kidding. Anyway, Gene was most famous for a story that was first published in 1893. Per the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Gene claimed that he and some friends had a terrifying encounter in the deep northern woods. Gene had been out hunting, he said, when he and a group had stumbled upon a fearsome hodag. Apparently, this beast had been spotted earlier in the week by some other lumbermen, so Gene and his party were somewhat prepared for the fight, but perhaps not prepared enough. Based on what Gene said happened. Gene claimed the beast attacked their hunting dogs, who, sadly, all perished in the fight. Then, per the Sunday Leader, quote, "The hodag became so infuriated that it began slashing down timber which was falling down in every direction, and the black charcoal smoke which was the hodag's breath began to suffocate the party. The group was only able to finally take the beast down because they'd come armed with special weapons, dynamite, and guns full of poison water. No mention of trees with holes in them to use as traps, but that never made much sense to us anyway, so we'll allow it. The hunters just kind of threw dynamite sticks at the monster until they burned it or blew it up or something. The paper is not very clear on that point, and somehow, eventually, they finally felled it. We guess that they didn't totally blow it to bits, because the paper mentions a very precise weight for the hodag, 185 pounds. Now, people were, and are, willing to believe that strange creatures exist out there in the world. We know this from our own extensive cryptid coverage. But it seems that the hodag story was hard for folks to swallow, even back in 1893. Though illustrations were widely circulated, the Wisconsin Historical Society explained that folks just weren't buying it. Maybe it was the lore. A platypus or gorilla was just easier to believe in than a tar smoke-breathing monster that sprung up from the decimated corpse of an ox. Or perhaps it was the source of the story. Lumbermen were known for their tall tales, and while Paul Bunyan and Babe were fun for campfire entertainment, serious reporting was another matter. As the Historical Society pointed out, quote, "It would take more than drawings for people to accept the hodag as real. And, based on Gene Shepard's tall tale, we would have assumed that that kind of proof was impossible. We would have, except for one strange thing. In 1896, years after his initial story made the rounds, a new series of articles popped up. It seemed that Gene Shepard had captured another hodag. And, according to the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, he had taken this monster alive. The Northwestern reported that, quote, "The beast, it seems, was at the time making one of its semi-weekly trips to Lake Goodyear, where it was accustomed to feed on mud turtles and water snakes, and then steal swiftly and silently back to its nest. Gene, he somehow got a photo of that hodag when it was out hunting turtles. We imagine that was not an easy task, considering the camera setup of the late 19th century, and then afterward, he went to rally the troops." The Sentinel reported that, quote, He and his friends had captured the creature by blocking its den with rocks and then knocking it out with a chloroform sponge. They apparently attached that sponge to a very, very long pole, which we consider to be a wise move. Once the Hodag was good and unconscious, they hauled it from its den and dragged it into Rhinelander. From there was only one thing to do: display the live and captive creature at the local county fair. That would surely prove the existence of the cryptid to all, right? It was the very first such event planned for Oneida County. At the fair, the Hodag was kept in a large, dark circus tent, where visitors could see it for a price, of course. Per the Herald's Time reporter, quote, Shepard quickly hustled people in and out of the Hodag tent, telling them it was for their own safety. They were also kept far away for the same reason. This attraction proved very popular, and the crowds flocked, sometimes from quite far away, to see the Hodag. It was a boon for Rhinelander, for Jean Shepard, and for pretty much everyone except for the Hodag itself, assuming that it had any feelings on the matter. We don't know exactly how long the beast was on display, but it was enough time for the story to circulate nationally, and for interested parties from esteemed institutions to take notice. They decided they'd travel to Wisconsin to see this creature for themselves. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, scientists, from the Smithsonian we gather, and zoo officials headed to Rhinelander to check out the creature for themselves. By then, the fair was over, but Jean was said to be keeping the Hodag captive in a large pit behind his home in town. When the scientists arrived, they were certainly surprised, though not, as you may have guessed by this point, by an amazing new species to enter into the books. Instead, they were met by, quote, an equally intriguing creation made out of wood and ox hides, bull horns, and bent steel rods. Honestly, if you find the same picture of the beast that Jean constructed as we found in the archives, this information will not come as a huge shock. That tent must have been pretty dark. It seems that Jean Shepard had planned, with local officials or not, it was never totally established, though we highly suspect that they were in on it, to create a spectacle that would both benefit northern Wisconsin and Jean himself. According to the Wisconsin Historical Society, he pulled it off with, quote, the help of a woodcarver named Luke Currie. They carved the body from wood and covered it with oxhide. They gave it bulging eyes and added 12 cattle horns along its spine. Finally, they added wires so they could move its head. And, apparently, they managed to trick most of the audience by keeping that tent very dim and making sure that no one stayed in there for more than a few moments. When they were asked why the Hodag wasn't eating, they explained that it only feasted once a week when they gave it some white bulldogs to eat. We're surprised it wasn't goats this time, we guess, but wow, how many white bulldogs did they have in the Wisconsin woods? When faced with the evidence of his hoax, Jean Shepard, he was unrepentant. Per the Herald Times reporter, he wrote at the time, thousands of people came to view the Hodag, and not one of them went away without having learned a little more about North Wisconsin. And many who came out of curiosity only have come to make their homes with us, either permanent or for a few weeks or months out of the year. And that, it was a boon. As the Times reporter pointed out, quote, the same time Shepard introduced the Hodag to the Oneida County Fair, Wisconsin's timber industry was on the decline. And, according to a historian the paper interviewed, quote, a major purpose of the fair was to attract people to Rhinelander's other industries, like farming or business. So, from Jean's point of view, that Hodag had done its job. If it had attracted the attention of scientists and made money from the people who'd come to see the contraption swing its wooden head to and fro in that tent, and believe for a little while in the fantastic, then so much better for Rhinelander. The bigger question might be, is it better for us, the lovers of the weird and the wonderful? Well, maybe. Because the Hodag has hung around northern Wisconsin to this day. Even though Gene Shepard's iteration was well and truly debunked, sightings have popped up here and there, and the creature is given pride of place as the mascot of the town. We've seen topiary displays, signs, advertisements, and yes, the school mascot, proudly celebrating a creature that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And ultimately, isn't that exactly what a good cryptid is? What a good cryptid does? It's something that catches our imaginations and just won't let go. We hope you'll join us next time for another real-life story from the fine print of America's local papers, from the lives of regular people, just like you and me, except for one strange thing. Strangers, I've released my first book, and it's available everywhere now as an audiobook, hardcover, and ebook. I read the audio version myself. It's called Lay Them to Rest, and it's about John and Jane Doe's, my years-long experience following forensic experts around the country, and our efforts to solve the mysteries of a cold case. One Strange Thing is an independent podcast. So, to support the show and to hear more of the entirely true and enticingly peculiar, you now have 3 options to enjoy 2 extra bonus episodes a month. On Apple Premium and Supercast, you can get the bonus episodes delivered to your app of choice for just $2.99, or for $2 more a month on Patreon, you'll get more fun extras. There you'll find ad-free early releases of our regular episodes, 2 full-length bonus episodes, monthly giveaways, blog posts, and even occasional live streams, all for $5 a month. We hope you'll check out one of these options to support the show. There's a link in our show notes. And if you enjoy One Strange Thing, please take a moment to leave us a great rating or review on one of your favorite podcast apps. That really helps.